The morning sunlight filtered through the cracks in the small wooden house, bathing everything in a golden glow. Emily, 15 years old, the eldest of 4 siblings, woke up early as usual to prepare breakfast. Born into a poor family in a remote countryside village, Emily was no stranger to hardship. Her parents, Mr. James and Mrs. Clare, were hardworking farmers struggling to provide for their 5 children. With her wide, bright eyes and a demeanor far more mature than her age, Emily was often considered her mother's right hand. Despite being young, she took on household responsibilities, cared for her siblings, and even helped her parents in the fields when needed. That morning started like any other, with the family gathered around the modest breakfast table. But suddenly Mrs. Clare clutched her chest and collapsed. No one anticipated that this would be the sign of a severe heart attack. In a panic, Mr. James and Emily rushed Mrs. Clare to the district hospital. Hours passed in anxious waiting before the doctor emerged with a grave expression. He explained that Mrs. Clare had a congenital heart condition and required immediate surgery at a larger city hospital to save her life. The transfer and operation required an enormous sum of money, something the James family could not afford. While Mr. James desperately sought loans, Mrs. Clare's condition worsened. That night, she called Emily to her bedside, holding her hand tightly. "Emily," she whispered, "I don't know if I'll make it. But if I don't, I need you to take care of your siblings. You're the eldest, and I trust you can do this." Her words pierced Emily's heart like a sharp blade. Overwhelmed, she could only nod as tears streamed down her face. A week later, Mrs. Clare passed away, leaving the family devastated. Her death struck like lightning, and Mr. James fell into a deep depression, drowning his sorrows in alcohol. The weight of caring for her siblings now rested squarely on Emily's young shoulders. Emily dropped out of school to manage the household. During the day, she took on odd jobs, from pulling weeds to hauling bricks, just to scrape together enough money for food. At night, she sang lullabies to her siblings and comforted them whenever they missed their mother. The youngest, little Nina, barely 2 years old, often cried for her mother, leaving Emily utterly exhausted. One day, while shopping for a small amount of food, Emily was berated by a vendor for bargaining. They called her a poor orphan, making her feel humiliated and ashamed. It was then Emily realized how society looked down on people like her. Yet those judgmental stares ignited a fierce determination within Emily. She vowed never to let herself or her siblings be trampled by others. She resolved to protect her family at all costs, no matter the hardships that lay ahead. One afternoon, as Emily was mending clothes for her siblings, a middle-aged man appeared at the door. He introduced himself as Mr. Douglas, a local land trader. With a sly smile, he offered to buy the family's only plot of farmland at a meager price, claiming the land was barren and unsuitable for cultivation. Despite her young age, Emily was sharp and cautious. She rejected his offer outright, even as Mr. Douglas tried to persuade her. "Your father must be worn out trying to care for so many children. Sell the land. It'll at least give you enough money to get by." Emily looked deep into his eyes and saw the ruthless calculation hidden behind his seemingly kind expression. She knew that if they lost their land, her family would have nothing left. Just a few days later, Emily's family received notice that their land was slated for clearance to make way for an industrial zone. Despite Mr. James, her father, insisting he had never agreed to sell, a land sale contract bearing his signature suddenly surfaced. Emily and Mr. James were stunned. Someone had forged his signature to steal their last remaining asset. Determined to seek justice, Emily decided to go to the local authorities. However, upon arriving, she was met with cold, indifferent gazes from the administrative staff and an irresponsible response. "The contract is clear. What more do you want? Go home." In her moment of despair, Emily met Miss Evelyn, one of her former teachers. Upon hearing about Emily's family situation, Miss Evelyn offered to help by recommending her for a job at the home of a well-off family in town. The money Emily would earn could be enough to provide for her younger siblings. Emily hesitated. She didn't want to leave her siblings behind, but in the end, she realized this was the only chance to save her family. The house where Emily came to work belonged to Mr. and Mrs. Wallace, a wealthy couple with contrasting personalities. Mr. Wallace was strict and domineering, while Mrs. Margaret was cold and fond of bossing around the household staff. Emily worked tirelessly from dawn until late at night, yet she was constantly criticized by Mrs. Margaret. One night, Emily accidentally noticed Mr. Wallace sneaking money out of the safe and leaving the house in the middle of the night. Her curiosity piqued, and she quietly followed him. To her surprise, she discovered him meeting with a group of strangers, seemingly involved in some shady land acquisition deals. A few days later, Emily received an anonymous letter accompanied by a photograph. The image showed Mr. Douglas, the man who had attempted to buy her family's land, sitting together with Mr. Wallace at a lavish banquet. The letter contained no words, but the photograph spoke volumes. Emily sensed a larger conspiracy at play, with her family caught as a small pawn in this web of greed. While trying to investigate further, Emily happened to run into Ryan, her childhood friend. Ryan, now an energetic law student back in town for summer break, listened to Emily's story. Not only did he sympathize with her, but he also decided to help her uncover the truth. Together, they devised a plan to expose those behind the land seizure and seek justice for Emily's family. However, as soon as they began their efforts, they were met with threats and intimidation. One evening, when Emily returned home, she found a strange bag left at the door. Inside were shards of broken bricks and a handwritten note. "Don't be curious, or you'll bring trouble upon yourself." Emily tried to remain calm in front of her siblings, but her heart was filled with anxiety. Did she have the strength to continue this fight? After receiving the threatening note, Emily considered giving up. However, it was Ryan, with his optimism and determination, who encouraged her. "Emily, if you give up now, they'll only grow bolder. We're not just fighting for justice for your family, but for everyone else they've wronged." Ryan devised a bold plan to gather evidence of Mr. Douglas and Mr. Wallace's shady transactions. Together, they decided to secretly track Mr. Wallace's movements, particularly his unusual late-night outings. After several days of surveillance, Emily and Ryan discovered that Mr. Wallace frequently met with a man at an abandoned house on the edge of town. They managed to take a few photographs but needed stronger evidence. One day after Mr. Wallace had left the house, they sneaked inside and found some scattered documents. Among them was a list of seized properties, including Emily's family's land. Strangely, all the properties had been purchased at extremely low prices and quickly resold to a large company. Ryan handed the documents to a friend who was a local journalist. Within days, an article titled "Land Seizure Conspiracy in Town X" appeared on the front page. The article caused a public outcry, forcing Mr. Wallace and Mr. Douglas to tread carefully. However, the article alone wasn't enough to expose the entire truth. Ryan reminded Emily, "We need undeniable evidence, like a recording or video of their deals." Emily decided to take a risk. She secretly placed a recording device in Mr. Wallace's office. Initially, the plan went smoothly, but before long, Mrs. Margaret caught Emily sneaking around the house. Furious, she immediately fired Emily, putting their plan temporarily on hold. Losing her job threw Emily into despair. The burden of caring for her siblings became heavier than ever. Mr. James, in his desperation, started drinking more and often argued with Emily. One day he broke down in tears and confessed, "I've brought this upon us. I signed the papers to sell the land when I was drunk, without knowing what I was doing." Mr. James's confession made Emily feel as if her world was collapsing. She didn't blame her father, but the revelation made her fight even more daunting. Just when Emily thought all hope was lost, she received a letter from Mrs. Martha, a former employee of the Wallace family. In the letter, Mrs. Martha revealed that she had overheard Mr. Wallace discussing plans to seize land with Mr. Douglas. Although Mrs. Martha wanted to help Emily expose the truth, she was afraid of retaliation. Ryan advised Emily to persuade Mrs. Martha to testify as a witness. After several attempts, Mrs. Martha agreed, on the condition that her identity would remain confidential. Emily and Ryan decided to organize a confrontation with Mr. Wallace. They used the audio recordings and Mrs. Martha's testimony to pressure Mr. Wallace into admitting the truth. At first, Mr. Wallace stubbornly denied everything, but when Emily presented the evidence, he began to lose his composure. In a recorded phone call, Mr. Douglas revealed that Mr. Wallace was the mastermind behind the scheme. This recording was played during a town meeting, leaving the entire community in shock. With undeniable evidence, the local authorities were forced to launch an investigation. Mr. Wallace and Mr. Douglas were arrested, and Emily's family's land was returned to them. Moreover, many other families in the town received compensation for the losses they had suffered. Emily's story spread throughout the town, becoming a source of inspiration for many. Despite being only a 15-year-old girl, her courage and resilience not only saved her family from destitution, but also brought justice to countless others. Emily became a symbol of sacrifice and bravery. Through her story, people learned that no matter how poor or powerless one may seem, with determination and a commitment to justice, it is possible to overcome any injustice in life. After the family regained their land, Emily faced a big question: how to rebuild their lives from the ruins. She knew she needed to earn enough money so her siblings could go to school and escape poverty. But as a 15-year-old girl, the road ahead was fraught with challenges. Ryan advised Emily to return to school. He said, "Only with knowledge can you change your fate, not just for yourself, but also for your siblings." Emily yearned to continue her education, but she didn't have the courage to leave her siblings. She worried that if she went to school, who would take care of the family? Emily's story left a strong impression on the townsfolk. Some kind-hearted individuals, including Miss Evelyn and Mrs. Martha, organized a fundraiser to help Emily return to school. The amount wasn't large, but it was enough for her to continue her education without excessive financial burden. Ryan also promised to help Emily's family regularly, from buying groceries to repairing their home. After many sleepless nights, Emily decided to send her siblings to live with their grandparents in the neighboring village. Though elderly, her grandparents loved the children dearly. Emily believed that they would be well cared for there, allowing her to focus on her studies. She hugged each sibling tightly, promising to return soon. Little Na, still very young, clung to Emily's hand, crying, "Will you forget us when you go to school?" Emily smiled, though tears streamed down her face. "Never. I'll study hard so one day I can take our whole family to a better place." In the following years, Emily juggled school and part-time jobs to support her family. She worked tirelessly, consistently ranking at the top of her class, earning praise from her teachers for her extraordinary perseverance. After graduating high school, she earned a scholarship to university with an essay detailing her journey of overcoming adversity. At university, Emily chose to study law, determined to become a defender of justice for the underprivileged, people who had once been like her. During a human rights seminar, Emily met Mr. Richard, a renowned lawyer known for helping victims of injustice. Moved by Emily's story, Mr. Richard took her on as an intern, mentoring her in the legal profession. There, Emily learned to fight not just with emotions, but also with knowledge and sharp reasoning. After becoming a lawyer, Emily returned to her hometown to assist farmers being exploited by large corporations. She provided legal representation and organized workshops to raise awareness about their rights. The old family home had now been rebuilt into a more spacious and comfortable house. Emily's siblings were attending school, living under her nurturing care. At a community gathering, Emily stood to share her story. She said, "Life is full of injustices, but never let them overwhelm you. Believe in yourself, trust in kindness, and don't be afraid to stand up for yourself and others." That's how we change the world, even if just a little. Emily's story serves as a reminder that even a small action can transform many lives. If you feel inspired, please share this story to spread the message of resilience and kindness. Support those around you. A word of encouragement or a small act of kindness can create miracles. Follow and subscribe for more meaningful stories like this.